Hello,
Hi.
we are back. Ken and me, Jeanette. We are reading today from the book club. We are reading Catherine Emmerich's Visit, the complete visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich.
And what is the name of our book club?
Be holy, for I am holy. And God wants us to be holy like Him. So every day we try to keep on track with holy books and readings and studies and prayers.
And
So
and
let us,
she was a mystic who was approved by the church. She's a blessed, and the church went through her writings and they looked at historical data and they said it was correct. So she's accepted by the church. And the best thing about this, and the reason why I decided to go ahead and do it when Jeanette said that, so she said it was a 12-year page. I'm like, what? But it goes through the entire Bible and they put it in the order of the Bible. So I'll put around where the 70 key events. So it will help you in your memorization of the Bible, and you'll learn about the mystical visions. And now we are on Joseph. So we did Jacob and now we're on Joseph. So you'll learn a little bit more. I learned so much about Jacob and all the people around him I didn't know
yeah,
about
me
Rebecca.
too.
Yeah, I hope you listen to the rest because Jeanette had to leave at the end. I please tell me you will listen to it because I learned so much about Rebecca, and I talked about it in the talk after because Jeanette had a thing that she had to go to. So, and then Rachel, I learned about her. I didn't know that her and Jacob were a lot alike. Um, and I just learned about all the people around them. So you're going to learn today about Joseph. So I'm looking forward. It's a little long, so we need to get started. We're going to flip back and forth, and Jeanette will stop when she needs me to start.
Yes, I'll read as much as I can. These are a little harder reading for me because that's why I go slow because I don't want to mispronounce any words, even though I know I do.
Me,
But I
me
try
too,
not to.
Jeanette. Anybody that does these words in
Okay.
the Bible does. You're not
Okay.
alone. Don't
Okay.
worry.
Doesn't stop me though.
No, it doesn't. You're brave about it.
Joseph and Aseneth. Joseph was 16 years old when he was sold into Egypt. He was of middle height, very slender and agile, active both in body and mind. He was indeed very different from his brothers, and all felt drawn to love him. Were it not for him, for the marked preference shown him by his father, his brothers also would have loved him. Reuben was of a more lively disposition than the others. Benjamin was a large, ungainly man, but very good-natured, easily led. Joseph wore his hair divided into three, one part on either side of his head, the third falling down behind in long curls. When ruler over Egypt, he wore it short, but afterward allowed it again to grow. When Jacob bestowed the many-colored coat upon Joseph, he gave over to him also some of the bones of Adam, without telling him, however, what they were. Jacob gave them to Joseph as a precious talisman, for he knew well that his brothers did not love him. Joseph carried the bones on his breast in a little leathern bag, rounded on top. When his brothers sold him, they took from him only the colored coat and his customary outer garment, but left the band and a sort of scapular on his breast, beneath which he had hung the little bag. The colored coat was white with broad red stripes. It had on the breast 3 rows of black cord crossing one another, in the center of which were yellow ornaments. It was full around the breast. When bound at the waist, the fullness served as a pocket. It was narrower toward the lower part of the skirt and had slits at the side to render motion easier. It fell below the knee, was somewhat longer in the back and open in front. Joseph's ordinary dress did not reach to the knees. Joseph was known to Pharaoh and his wife before his imprisonment. Potiphar's affairs were so flourishing under Joseph's management. Potiphar himself was so blessed during Joseph's stay under his roof, since he conducted all things so well for Pharaoh, that the latter was eager to see the faithful servant, Pharaoh's wife, who was religiously inclined and very desirous of salvation, and who had at the same time, like all the Egyptians, a great hankering after new gods, was so astounded at the wise, intelligent, extraordinary young stranger that she honored him interiorly as a divinity. She said repeatedly to Pharaoh, "This man has been sent by our gods. He is not a human being like ourselves." Yes. Hence it came to pass that he was thrown not into the common dungeon, but into the prison reserved for the nobility, and there he was made the overseer. Pharaoh's wife sincerely deplored his conviction as a malefactor and thought that she had been mistaken in him. But when he was liberated and again appeared at court, she treated him with great distinction. The cup that Joseph ordered to be placed in Benjamin's sack was the first present the queen had made to him. I knew it well. It had 2 handles, but no foot. It seemed to have been cut out of one precious stone or one solid, transparent mass. I know not which, and was in shape exactly like the upper part of the chalice used at the Last Supper. It was also among the vessels that the children of Israel took away from them from Egypt, and it was afterward preserved in the Ark of the Covenant. Joseph was 7 years in prison. During his greatest affliction, he received the mysterious blessing of Jacob in the same manner as the patriarchs had done. He had a vision also of a numerous posterity. I know all about Potiphar's wife. I saw how desirous she was to pervert Joseph, but after his elevation, she did penance and became chaste and devout. She was a tall, powerful woman, her skin of a yellowish brown and shining like silk. She wore a colored robe over which was one of figured gauze. The lower one shone through it as if through lace. Joseph was thrown much with her, since his master's affairs were all entrusted to him. But when he became aware of the fact that she had grown more entrusted to him, she had grown more familiar in her manner toward him, he no longer remained in the house overnight during his master's absence. She often intruded herself upon him when he was busy at his writing. Once I saw her enter his presence in immodest attire. He was standing writing in one corner of a hall. In those days, they used to write upon rolls of parchment which hung on the wall. The writer either sat or stood before them. She addressed him and he replied. Then she grew bolder, seeing which he turned hurriedly away. She grasped his mantle, but he fled, leaving it in her hand. I saw Joseph with Potiphar's pagan priest at Heliopolis. Aseneth, the daughter of Dinah and the Sishmite, lived with them as a prophetess and a decorator of the idols. 7 other maidens were her companions. Potiphar had bought her from her nurse in her 5th year. This nurse had fled with her to the Red Sea by order of Jacob, that the child might not be murdered by his sons. Aseneth possessed the spirit of prophecy and was esteemed by Potiphar as a priestess, as a prophetess, as a prophetess. Joseph knew her, but he knew not that she was his niece. She was a very earnest character. She sought seclusion, and in spite of her great beauty, she abhorred the society of men. She was favored with significant visions, was familiar with the Egyptian star worship, and had a secret presentiment of the religious of the patriarchs. I saw no witchcraft connected with her. She saw in vision the whole mystery of life, the transplanting, the coming to, and the departure of Israel from Egypt, even the long journey through the wilderness. She wrote many rolls of the leaves of the water plant or on skin. The letters were strange looking. They were like the heads of birds and animals. These writings were, even during her lifetime, misunderstood by the Egyptians and misconstrued into a sanction of their wicked abominations. Aseneth grieved deeply over the misconception brought about by the evil one, and she shed many tears. She had more numerous visions than any other at the time, and she was filled with wondrous wisdom. She conducted herself gravely and refused advice to none. She could weave also and embroider. Her enlightened spirit detected man's corruption of truth. Therefore was she grave, reserved, retiring, and silent. I saw that the misconception of Aseneth's visions and writings led to her being worshipped under the name of Isis, and Joseph under that of Osiris. This perhaps was the cause of her abundant tears. She also wrote against their erroneous conception of her visions, which had led to their proclaiming her the mother of all the gods. When Potiphar offered sacrifice, Aseneth ascended a tower upon which she seemed to be as if were in a little garden. Here she gazed upon the stars by moonlight. She fell into ecstasy and read all things clearly in the stars. The truth was shown her in pictures because she was chosen of God. I have seen the pagan priests introduced into strange diabolical worlds where they beheld the most abominable things. But such diabolical visions were the secret communications of Aseneth, disfigured and made to contribute to the abominations of idolatry. Aseneth introduced many useful arts and domestic animals into Egypt. Among the later, for instance, the cow. She taught the art of making cheese, that of weaving, and many other hitherto unknown to the inhabitants. She also healed many diseases. The plow was introduced by Joseph, who was himself skilled in its use. There was one thing that seemed truly wonderful to me. Aseneth ordered the flesh of the numerous animals slaughtered for sacrifice to be boiled down until it became a gelatinous mass, which served for food on campaigns and in times of scarcity. The operation was carried on in the open air and in cauldrons in the earth. The Egyptians were rejoiced and amazed at this new mode of procuring food. And
When Joseph, sorry, too loud. When Joseph met Aseneth at the pagan priest's dwelling, she approached to embrace him. This she did not through boldness, but impelled by the Spirit. It was in her a kind of prophetic action and took place in presence of the pagan priest. Aseneth was looked upon as holy, but I saw Joseph keep her off with outstretched hand and addressed earnest words to her. Then Aseneth, deeply agitated, retired to her own room, where she remained in tears and penance. I saw her in her chamber. She stood concealed by a curtain, her wreath of long and beautiful hair falling around her and curling at the ends. There was impressed on the skin of the pit of her stomach a wonderful sign. In a figure like a heart-shaped shell stood a child with outstretched arms, holding in one hand a small dish, in the other a cup or chalice. In the dish there were 3 young ears of corn, and appeared to be just breaking out of the husk, and the figure of a dove which seemed to peck after the grapes in the cup held by the child. Jacob knew of this sign, but notwithstanding he had to send the child away in order to shield her from the rage of his sons. But when he came down into Egypt, Joseph told him all things. He recognized his granddaughter by the mark. Joseph, too, had a mark of the same kind upon his breast, a very full bunch of grapes. Now I saw an angel appear in resplendent raiment, holding a lotus in his hand. He saluted Aseneth. She glanced at him and drew her veil around her. He commanded her to dry her tears, to adorn herself in festival robes, and he also requested her to bring him food. She left the room and returned adorned as directed, bringing with her a low table, small and light, upon which were wine and little flat loaves that had been baked in ashes. Aseneth evinced no fear. She was not shy, but simple and humble, just like Abraham and the other patriarchs when treating with apparitions. When the angel now spoke to her, she unveiled. He asked her for some honey, but she replied that, unlike other maidens who are fond of it, she had none. Thereupon the angel told her that she would find some among the idols that stood in the chamber. These idols were of various forms. They had heads of animals and bodies, and for bodies, serpents coiled downward. Wow, this is quite a reading today.
I'm telling you.
Aseneth looked and found a beautiful coarse-celled honeycomb, white as the host of our altars. She set it before the angel, who bade her to eat out of it. She blessed it, and I saw it shining and flashing between them. I cannot express the signification of this heavenly honey, for when one sees such things, it is just as they actually are. One knows all. But now, when I try to recall it, the honey appears to be what is called honey, yet I know not what the flowers, the bees, and the honey properly signify. I can only say this much. Aseneth really possessed in herself only bread and wine, or that which is typified by bread and wine. But she had no honey. By the reception of this honey, she issued from idolatry into the light of Israel, into salvation through the old law. It signified also that she should aid many souls, that many like bees should build around her. I heard her say that she would drink no more wine, for that now she was more in need of honey. I saw numbers of bees and vast stores of honey in Midian near Jethro. In blessing the honeycomb, the angel directed his finger toward all regions of the world, which signified that by her presence, her types, and the mysteries of its own. The honey signification. Aseneth should be a mother and a leader. When later on she was honored as a divinity and represented with numerous breasts, it was in consequence of the misconception of her vision that she should nourish many. The angel told her that she was destined to be united with Joseph, that she should be his bride, and he blessed her as Isaac had blessed Jacob, and the angel blessed Abraham. The three lines that constituted the formula of the blessing were drawn upon her twice, once to the pit of the stomach, once to the abdomen. After this, I saw in vision Joseph going to Potiphar to demand Aseneth for his wife, but I can only remember that, like the angel, he carried a lotus in his hand. Joseph knew of Aseneth's wonderful wisdom, but their mutual relationship was hidden from both. I saw that Pharaoh's son likewise was in love with Aseneth, on which account she had to remain secluded. He had persuaded Dan and Gad to espouse his cause, and all three lay in ambush to slay Joseph. But Judah, obeying a divine inspiration, I think, warned Joseph to take another route. Benjamin also conducted himself nobly in this affair and defended Aseneth. Dan and Gad were punished by the death of their children, for even before it was known to anyone, they had been warned not to enlist in this murderous design. When Joseph and Aseneth appeared in public, like the pagan priests of Potiphar, they bore in their hand a sign regarded as sacred and emblematic of the highest authority. The upper part was a ring, the lower a Latin cross, a T. It served as a seal, and when grain was measured and divided, the heaps were marked with it. It was used in the same way for the building of granaries and canals, also for the rising and falling of the Nile. Writings were sealed with it after they first been marked with a red vegetable juice. When Joseph discharged any official duty, this symbol of authority, the cross being clasped in the ring, lay on a cushion at his side. It seemed to me also like a distinctive sign of the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant still enclosed in Joseph. Aseneth also had an instrument like a wand. When in vision, she followed wherever it led. Where it quivered, she struck the earth and so discovered springs and water. It was made under the influence of the stars. In the processions of the high festivals, Joseph and Aseneth rode upon a glittering chariot. Aseneth wore an ancient shield which enclosed the whole person from below the arms. On it were numerous signs and figures. Her dress reached to her knees, below which limbs were tightly laced. A wide mantle fell over the back, the sides of which were clasped together over the knees. The toes of her shoes were turned up like skates, and her headdress of colored feathers and pearls was shaped like a helmet. Joseph wore a tight-fitting coat with sleeves, and over it a golden breastplate covered with figures. Straps with golden knots were crossed around the hips, and from the shoulders fell a mantle. His head ornament was of feathers and precious stones. When Joseph went to Egypt, New Memphis was being built about 7 leagues north of Old Memphis. Between the new cities built on a dike was a highway with walks. Scattered among the trees were idols with grave and sad female faces and bodies of dogs. They sat upon stone slabs. There were as yet no beautiful buildings, only great long ramparts of artificial stone mountains full of vaults and chambers. The dwellings were slight with a superstructure of wood. There was still great forests and morasses all around. At the flight of Mary into Egypt, The Nile had already changed its course. The Egyptians worshipped all kinds of animals, toads, serpents, crocodiles. They looked on quite coolly while a person was being devoured by a crocodile. At Joseph's coming, the worship of the bull had not yet come into practice. It was introduced in consequence of Pharaoh's dream of the 7 fat and the 7 lean cows. They had numerous kinds of idols, some like swaddled children, others like coiled serpents, some of which could be made longer or shorter at pleasure. A great many of the idols were adorned with breastplates on which the plans of cities and the course of the Nile were curiously inscribed. These shields were made in accordance with the scriptures which the pagan priests traced in the stars, and after whose plan they built cities and canals. New Memphis was founded in this way. The evil spirits at the time must have possessed a different, more material power. For I saw the Egyptian sorcery came out of the earth, out of the abyss. When a pagan priest began his enchantments, I saw figures of all kind of ugly animals arise out of the ground around the sorcerer and enter his mouth in a current of black vapor.
Ew.
Yeah, this is getting really crazy. He became thereby entranced and clear-sighted. It was as if the entrance of each spirit world hitherto closed was opened up to him, and he saw things far and near, the abysses of the earth, countries, human beings, in fine, all things over which each particular spirit exerted an influence. Modern witchcraft always appears to me to be more under the influence of the spirits of the air, while the wizards saw by the aid of these spirits appeared like a delusion, a mirage, which they conjured up before him. I could see far beyond these pictures, for they were like shadows. It was as if one looked behind a curtain. When the Egyptian pagan priests intended to read the stars, they fasted as a preparation, performed certain purification, clothed themselves in sackcloth, and sprinkled themselves with ashes. While they gazed upon the stars of their tower, sacrifices were offered. The pagans of those times had a confused knowledge of the religious mysteries of the true God, which had been handed down from Seth, Enoch, and Noah, and the patriarchs of the chosen people. Therefore were there so many abominations in their idolatry. The devil made use of them, as later on of heresy, to weave the pure, unclouded, authentic revelations of God into a snare for man's destruction. Therefore, God enveloped the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant in fire in order to preserve it. The woman of Egypt in Joseph's time was still clothed with, like, this is the one I have trouble with,
Semiramis.
Semiramis. When Jacob went into Egypt to Joseph, he pursued the same route through the wilderness by which later on Moses journeyed to the promised land. Jacob knew that he would see Joseph again. He always had a presentiment of this in his heart. He had, even on this journey to Mesopotamia, at the place upon which he erected the altar, not where he saw the ladder, a vision of his future sons. Once he saw in the region where Joseph was sold sink from sight and like a star rise again in the south. He exclaimed, therefore, when they brought him to the blood-stained coat. The foregoing circumstance almost forgotten recurring to him, I shall weep for Joseph until I find him again. Jacob had, through Reuben, made many inquiries as to whom Joseph had married, but had not yet been entirely enlightened on the point that Joseph's wife was his own niece. Ugh. Reuben and Potiphar were old acquaintances. Owing to the influence of the former, the latter received circumcision and served the God of Jacob. Jacob dwelt about a day's journey distant from Joseph. When he fell sick, Joseph drove in a chariot to see him. Jacob questioned him closely about Aseneth, and when he heard of the sign on her person, he exclaimed, "She is the flesh of thy flesh, she is the bone of thy bone." And he revealed to Joseph who she was. Joseph was so deeply affected that he almost lost consciousness. On his return home, he told his wife, and both shed tears to their heart's content over the news. Sometime after Jacob grew worse, Joseph was again by his side. Jacob put his feet from the couch to the floor, and Joseph had to lay his hand under his father's hip and swear to bury it in Canaan. While Joseph swore, Jacob adored the blessing hidden in him, for he knew that Joseph had received from the angel the blessing that had been withdrawn from himself. Joseph bore this blessing in his right side until death. Even after death, it lay enclosed in his body until the night before the departure of the Israelites, when Moses took possession of it and placed it in the Ark of the Covenant, together with the remains of Joseph as the sacred thing of the chosen people. 3 months after this visit, Jacob died. Both Jews and Egyptians celebrated his obsequies and sounded his praises, for he was greatly loved. Aseneth bore to Joseph first Manasseh and Ephraim, then other children, in all 18, among them several twins. She died 3 years before Joseph and was embalmed by Jewish women. As long as Joseph lived, her body stood in his own monument. But the ancients of the people had taken some part of her intestines, which they preserved in a little golden figure. And as the Egyptians also aspired to its possession, it was entrusted to the Jewish midwives. One of these women placed it in a reed box smeared with pitch and concealed it in the bulrushes near the canal. On the night of the departure, a nurse of the tribe of Asher brought this secret thing to Moses. The woman's name was Sarah. Joseph, at his death, was embalmed by the Jews in the presence of Egyptians. They were placed together, the remains of Joseph&Aseneth, in compliance with the notes that the latter had made from her visions and had left to the Jews. The Egyptian priests and astrologists had placed Joseph and Aseneth among their own divinities. They had some inkling of the notes left by Aseneth and a presentiment of the high influence, the blessing that she and Joseph would be for Israel. But that blessing they coveted for themselves, and therefore they sought to oppress Israel. It was on this account that the Israelites, who multiplied astonishingly after Joseph's death, were so harassed by the Pharaoh. The Egyptians knew well that the Israelites would not leave the country without the bones of Joseph. Consequently, at several different times, they stole some of the remains of Joseph and last got entire possession of them. The Jewish people at large knew of Joseph's corpse, but not the mystery that it contained. That was known only to a few, but the entire nation grieved deeply when the ancients found out and made known to them that the holy thing upon which the promise rested had been stolen. Moses, who had been reared at Pharaoh's court in all the Egyptian wisdom, visited his people and learned the cause of their grief. When he murdered the Egyptian, God ordained that as a fugitive he should go to Jethro, since the latter, by his connection with Sibyl Sigola, would be able to help him discover the purloined mystery. Moses had also, at the command of God, married Sephora in order to incorporate that family into the house of Israel. Jeanette?
Segola was the natural daughter of Pharaoh by a Jewish mother. Although reared in the Egyptian star worship, she was very fond of the Jews. It was she who had divulged to Moses while still at court that he was not a son of Pharaoh. Aaron, after the death of his first wife, had to marry a daughter of this Sagola in order that the mother's influences with the Israelites might be increased. The children of this marriage went with the Israelites at their departure from Egypt, but Aaron was obliged to separate from his wife, that the Aaronic priesthood, no, Aaronic, is that how you say it?
I think so.
Aaronic priesthood might spring from a purely Jewish stock. Segola's daughter, after her separation from Aaron, married again. Her descendants at the time of the Savior dwelt at Abela, whether her mummy had been brought by them. Segola was very enlightened and possessed great influence over Pharaoh. She had on her forehead a bump such as many of the prophets had in olden times. She was led by the Spirit to procure numerous favors and gifts for the Israelites. On the night upon which the angel of the Lord struck the firstborn of the Egyptians, Segola, wrapped in her veil, accompanied Moses, Aaron, and 3 other Israelites to 2 sepulchre mounds, which were separated by a canal over which lay a bridge. The canal flowed between Memphis and Goshen in the Nile. The entrance into the mounds was under the bridge and below the surface of the water. Steps led from the bridge down to it. Segola descended along with Moses. She cast into the water a scrap of paper upon which was inscribed the name of God. The water retreated and left the entrance to the monument free. They struck on the stone door and it opened inward. Then they called to the others to come down. When they did so, Moses bound their hands together with his stole and made them swear to protect the mystery. After the oath, he loosened their hands, and all entered the vault, where they struck a light which showed all kinds of passages with images of the dead standing therein. Joseph's body with the remains of Aseneth lay in an Egyptian terraform metal coffin, which shone like polished gold. The back formed a cover. This they lifted off, and Moses took the mystery out of the hollow body of Joseph, wrapped it in clothes, and handed it to Segola, who carried it in her arms, concealed under her garments. The remaining bones were placed together upon a stone, wrapped in cloths, and carried away by the men. Now that they had gained possession of the sacred thing, Israel could depart from the country. Segola wept, but Israel was full of joy. Moses concealed a relic of Joseph's body in the top of his staff. This top was in form like a medlar or persimmon. It was yellowish and surrounded by leaves. It was different from the shepherd's staff that Moses was commanded to cast on the ground before God, and which was there changed to a serpent. It was a reed. The upper and the lower end could be pushed in and drawn out, with the lower point, which appeared to me to be of metal and which was in form like a sharp pencil. Moses touched the rock, as if tracing words upon it. The rock opened under the points, and water gushed forth. Water flowed also from the sand, wherever Moses made signs upon it with the staff. The upper part of the reed staff, in shape like a medlar, could be pushed in and drawn out. Before it, the Red Sea divided. From Joseph's death to the departure of Israel from Egypt, there were about 170 years. according to our manner of reckoning. But they had at that time another way of reckoning, other weeks and years. This was often explained to me, but I cannot now recall it. While the Israelites lived in Egypt, they had no temple, but only tents. They piled up stones, poured oil over them, sacrificed grain and lambs, sang and prayed. Wow.
I'm glad the next one is the Ark of the Covenant, because that was insufferable. I'm telling you, that was the most boring. We knew very little, and even what they said about Joseph was just not very good. So I don't have a whole lot to say about that, except I sure hope people don't come to that one as the first one that they come to. That is,
Guys, there's a lot better stories than that one,
yeah.
but it kind of enlightened me in a lot of things. Like, you
Really?
know, Aseneth, I know that that was her name. I know that that's who he married. I knew that, but
Okay.
I didn't know much about her. I didn't know that she was also that that she also had visions. I didn't know that she
See,
also came from.
that's why it was boring to me. I didn't know that he even was married to a
Well,
woman.
it's very interesting to me because
I'm glad.
where you like history and numbers and stuff, I like knowing the people and
Well,
knowing
that's what I'm
where they
saying.
came from and stuff, because if you
I
think
like
about
that
it,
too.
God
Yeah.
likes you to stay in your tribe, okay?
Right.
In those days, it didn't matter that much to God that it was a cousin or a family or whatever. It really didn't. He just wanted you to stay in your tribe,
Be
in
protected. You had
the
to be
12
protected.
tribes when Moses was about. In the 12 tribes, he
Right.
wanted you to marry within your tribe. He didn't want you to marry outside of your tribe.
He was
So
protecting them.
for Joseph to be such an important person in in the life of Christianity, or because we weren't Christian yet, but we kind of were getting there. I call him Christian.
Right.
I couldn't see him marry an 100% Egyptian. I just couldn't see it. It bothered me so much that he was marrying.
So was she an Egyptian?
She was, but she believed in God.
That explains a lot.
She was an Egyptian she was, because everybody in all the Egyptians were looking at her visions and making them idols and gods and stuff. But she
That
would cry. She would cry because in her heart, she knew that it wasn't. She knew that there's only one God in her heart. She truly was.
I'm so glad you got
Yeah.
something out of this, because I got nothing.
So Joseph married
I get it
someone
now.
that helped him continue with his faith.
Right.
Someone that wasn't separating him, showing him idols and different kinds of worships and stuff.
Right.
And in there, it also talks about that she kept this in her heart. She didn't talk about this.
I'm
was
so
private.
glad, because I couldn't get anything out of it.
This was all private to her.
Okay.
And when the angel approached her and stuff, the angel helped guide her, because she was very confused, probably because she was living in a world that she saw all these things. She was sharing with people these things, but these people were using them as gods and idols when they weren't. They were, she saw all these things that were to come. So that's very interesting. So now I know that Joseph had a very interesting wife.
Well,
They
now that
certainly-
you explained it, now I get it. Okay, so now I see. I didn't know Joseph had a wife named Aseneth. Like I said, some more details than I
knew
know.
that. I knew
That's why it
that.
was boring to me. But now that I'm like, okay, so, and the way you're explaining about her being Egyptian, they're coming from different cultures. You know, today when two people from two different cultures marry, there's sometimes a lot of friction in them. So that makes sense what you're saying. Now I have an interest in this story where I didn't a few minutes ago. So I'm
And they had
so
two
glad you
sons.
get it.
And they had two sons. And those sons were brought up then holy, because the mother and the father believed in the one God,
Right.
even though they were accepted by the Egyptians because of their powers and their visions and their awesome way of being an accountant and, doing all this. But then when he died, then everything went big time. Now, the part about Moses, that was very, very enlightening also, how he got a hold of the bones of Joseph, because Moses was told to get those bones to bring them with him because they were very important.
Okay.
Now, it's kind of understandable that they had to kind of steal them because the Egyptians were going to give that up. But in the actual bones was something special, was something that, what did they call it? They called it the they never tell you what it is, but the sacred thing. They call it the sacred thing.
Sacred
Now
thing.
they had gained possession of the sacred thing. Israel could depart from the country. Segola wept, but Israel was full of joy, which means that God wanted them to have that sacred thing that belonged to Joseph, that was in Joseph's body, which was that blessing. Somehow the blessing stays with you when you die, I guess, and they needed to get a hold of that. We don't know what it is, but they did, because they got a hold of it and they left with it. So,
Right. Wow.
can I tell you, it's a vision. I mean, it's supernatural,
No,
It's
but it wasn't just the vision. It was putting it in perspective. You just put it all into perspective. You put something that was extremely confusing to me, and I couldn't wrap my head around any of it. So, and the way she tells things, the way she says things, it's just
well,
she's
because she tells it as she's seeing it, and then
right,
at times she says, I can't really recall. She
right,
said it once here. She says, I can't really recall what it was I saw. I can't remember now. And then she just keeps going because
right.
she's scared she might forget. So she
Yeah,
tries
and
to
see,
write down the visions.
that totally throws me off. But now, because if I know a little bit of the story, I can kind of work around her. But the fact that you knew this, you just put it all in perspective, and now I get it. I mean, I'm
Okay.
sure we're not getting all of it, but you took something that I was just like, I don't even
The
want people to
main,
listen to this, but now I get it. So I'm
the
going to tell
main thing.
everyone, yeah, yeah,
Well, the good thing about this is that later on, when she's going to get back to these things that we've read, if we want to, if you have the book, you can always go back and reread them, guys. Or you
right,
can look at our videos that we have the name of what it is we're covering on the video that we're reading. So if you want to learn a little more about it, or if you read something, in the Bible or whatever, and you go, oh, well, I remember hearing something about that, Catherine Emmerich's vision or whatever, then you can look it up, find it, and you
right,
can listen a little bit more and get some little tidbits from in between.
right.
So, it's a study that we're going to be living the rest of our lives until we
Well,
die. We're going to
I'm gonna
graduate in heaven from the Bible studies.
I was just like, this really
Okay.
threw me for a loop. So I'm really excited that you put it all
Yeah.
into perspective, because that makes all the difference. So now I'm really excited about tomorrow's,
The
or
Ark
the
of the
next,
Covenant.
not tomorrow's,
Yes.
the next day. Yeah. Because we're taping this on Monday, but it's for Tuesday. So Wednesday we will be doing the Ark of the Covenant. Now that's going to be exciting. That's going to be exciting. So, but I'm so happy that you put this in perspective, because now I have a little bit more of knowledge of Joseph having an interracial marriage and
It
having
was someone
a
from
wife.
his tribe, and he didn't know about it until the end. At the end, Jacob told him who she was.
Right.
And she cried, or he cried, because I guess they didn't like the idea that they were that close. But at the same time, if you think about it, that's what God wanted. Because did you see that she cried, or he cried? One of them were crying
Okay,
when
but
they
I
found
thought
out.
she was Egyptian and she was of a different race, the way it sounded.
Yeah, they weren't happy with the news.
Okay. So in that in they probably had the races probably were had some Egyptian in them then, it sounds like. Because she was an Egyptian, it says.
Yeah,
Right?
but she was the niece. She
Okay.
was the niece of Jacob.
So then his brother or whatever must have been married to an Egyptian. That's what it must have been.
I don't know
Okay.
how it
Well,
happened, but
but
she
you know
was
what
from the
though?
same line
It
as
makes it
Jacob.
it makes the story understandable and interesting and puts it in perspective. So I am so happy that you understood because I had nothing to even say. So yeah, perfect. All right.
Okay,
So the next one will be Ark of the Covenant, guys. We'll see you on Wednesday.
bye.
Bye.